Imagine this. You're standing at a crowded party. Music throbs in the background, voices blend into an indistinct roar, and laughter breaks through the air like sudden fireworks. Glasses clink. Someone tells a story about their week. Someone else scrolls their phone, half listening. It's the kind of scene that, to most people, is the very definition of a healthy social life. But your eyes aren't dancing from face to face, scanning for connection. You're not leaning in for gossip or competing for attention. Instead, you're drifting somewhere else entirely, your mind drawn to a question that won't leave you alone. What am I even doing here? Everyone around you seems immersed in the ritual. You feel like you're watching a theater performance in which the actors don't know they're acting. They laugh in predictable rhythms, trade stories no one will remember tomorrow, and talk about events, trends, and other people, as if this chatter is the fabric of life itself. Yet something in you resists, not out of arrogance, not because you dislike people, but because the whole thing feels thin, like eating cotton candy when you're starving for a real meal. And then the real paradox hits you. Society teaches that human connection is everything, that friendships, parties, and being social are cornerstones of happiness. Entire industries, from dating apps to self-help seminars, tell you that your worth is partly defined by your network, your social calendar, your ability to fit in. So why then do some of the sharpest minds, the deepest thinkers, the most self-possessed individuals in history seem to care so little about social life? Why do they vanish into solitude, preferring the company of their thoughts over the noise of the crowd? It's not just the reclusive philosophers like Nietzsche or the eccentric scientists like Newton. Even in the modern world, you'll find brilliant entrepreneurs, artists, and innovators quietly withdrawing from the constant demands of social interaction, sometimes to the bewilderment or even concern of those around them. Is this detachment a sign of social failure, or of a deeper kind of freedom? Here's the unsettling truth. We live in a time where being constantly connected is considered a virtue. The friend who's always busy but never alone is admired. The person who spends Friday night at home thinking instead of mingling is quietly pitied or suspected of being lonely. But what if the opposite is true? What if stepping back from the social stage isn't loneliness, but liberation? You've probably felt it before. The strange sense of being in a conversation that doesn't matter. The energy drain after hours of small talk. The quiet voice inside you that wonders if your time and your mind are worth more than this constant, shallow exchange. And here's where the paradox deepens. Human beings are wired for connection, yes. But the quality of that connection, not its quantity, shapes whether it nourishes you or depletes you. And in a world obsessed with the optics of social life, the real nourishment often gets lost. Think of it like this. In nature, predators hunt in silence. They don't waste their energy in endless movement. They move only when it matters. But in modern social culture, we're taught to be in motion all the time, posting, liking, chatting, attending, without asking, to what end? Maybe the question isn't, why don't smart people care about social life, but why does everyone else care so much? Could it be that the endless pursuit of social validation hides a deeper fear, a fear of being alone with one's own thoughts, a fear that without the constant mirror of other people's attention, we might have to confront who we actually are? You might recall a moment when you were forced into stillness, alone in your room, no phone, no chatter, no external noise. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Your mind scrambled for distraction. But then, if you let it, a different kind of clarity emerged. Thoughts that had been buried under conversations began to rise. Ideas, insights, even uncomfortable truths you'd been avoiding began to surface. What if this, not constant social stimulation, is where the real growth happens? What if smart people have simply realized that much of what passes for social life is actually a sophisticated form of procrastination, a way to avoid the deep work of thinking, creating, and facing oneself? And what if the cost of refusing this truth is a life so busy being seen, it forgets to actually be? You can almost feel it now, the tension between two lives. One is loud, visible, filled with constant motion and validation. The other is quieter, more hidden, but perhaps infinitely richer. Which one do you choose? Because here's the thing, the answer might cost you something, your reputation, your comfort, even your sense of belonging. But it could also give you back something you didn't know you'd lost. And that's where we must go next, into the roots of this phenomenon, into the psychological and philosophical forces that make some people walk away from the social game entirely and never look back. If you strip away the polite smiles, the filtered photos, and the lively conversations, what remains beneath most social interactions? Psychologists and philosophers have been wrestling with this question for centuries, and their conclusions are often unsettling. At the core of much social behavior lies not pure connection, but a relentless hunger for validation, a need to see ourselves reflected positively in the eyes of others. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear in public to present an image that will be accepted, admired, or at least tolerated by society. Behind the mask lies the shadow, the hidden aspects of ourselves we'd rather not expose. Most people spend their entire lives maintaining this mask, adjusting it to the audience, terrified that if it slips, the truth underneath will drive others away. Now imagine a mind that values truth more than acceptance. That person begins to see the exhausting maintenance of the persona as a tax on their time and integrity. To them, ordinary social life begins to feel like a subtle betrayal of self. Arthur Schopenhauer went further, suggesting that much of what we call socializing is driven by boredom and fear. In his bleak but razor-sharp view, people seek constant company not because they truly enjoy it, but because solitude forces them to confront the emptiness of their inner world. Most would rather be distracted by the noise of others than face the silence of their own minds. Nietzsche sharpened this point with characteristic brutality. "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly," he wrote. "For the thinker, the artist, the innovator, the crowd's approval becomes less relevant, sometimes even an obstacle. Social life, with its endless small compromises, can feel like gravity dragging them down from the heights they are trying to reach. And yet, this isn't just a personal quirk of philosophers or outliers. Modern psychology backs up what these thinkers intuited long ago. Research into social comparison theory shows that much of our interaction is fueled by a need to measure ourselves against others, to see if we are winning or losing in the invisible competition of life. It's why we scroll through social media feeds we secretly resent, why we care about who liked our post, why we attend events we have no genuine interest in. For the highly analytical or deeply self-aware person, this realization changes everything. Once you see that much social activity is less about connection and more about subtle ranking, posturing, and distraction, it becomes harder to participate without a sense of hollowness. But here's where the trap tightens. Society has built entire moral frameworks around sociability. Extroversion is rewarded. Networking is framed as essential to success. Loners are pitied at best, distrusted at worst. Even language betrays the bias. Someone with no social life is assumed to be missing something vital, while someone popular is automatically seen as thriving. This bias is so deeply embedded that stepping away from the social game feels almost like breaking a law. And in a sense it is, because you're violating the unspoken contract that says we must all participate in the collective theater, even if it means playing a role that isn't ours. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, observed that the deepest fulfillment doesn't come from the approval of others, but from living in alignment with one's values and purpose. To the person chasing truth, depth, or mastery, this purpose often outweighs the rewards of social compliance. Time becomes too precious to trade for interactions that drain rather than enrich. And then there's the Huxleyan twist. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley imagined a society kept docile not through fear, but through pleasure and distraction, constant entertainment, constant connection, constant social noise, all of it ensuring that people never have to pause long enough to ask the dangerous questions: who am I? What am I doing with my life? When you start to see modern social culture through that lens, it stops being harmless fun and starts looking like a form of control, not in the sinister, shadowy sense, but in the far more effective sense of keeping people too distracted to challenge the deeper structures of their lives. And here is where the hidden problem reveals itself. Smart people don't avoid social life because they're antisocial. They avoid it because they've noticed how much of it operates as a subtle system of conformity. Every joke you laugh at, every opinion you nod along to, every silence you don't break, each is a tiny act of alignment with the group's unwritten rules. When you begin to resist these micro-alignments, something strange happens. Conversations feel heavier, as if you're no longer fluent in the language everyone else is speaking. You see the coded exchanges for what they are: status negotiations, ego maintenance, avoidance strategies, and the illusion of spontaneity breaks. And once it breaks, you can't go back. This is why withdrawing from social life isn't always a conscious decision at first. It begins as discomfort, a vague sense that something feels off. Over time, that discomfort sharpens into awareness, and awareness becomes choice. But choice comes at a cost, because if you step back too far, you risk being labeled aloof, cold, arrogant, even broken. And yet, history shows that some of the most profound contributions to art, science, and philosophy have come from those willing to pay that price. The hidden problem, then, is not that smart people don't care about social life. It's that they care about something more. Something that social life, in its mass-produced, crowd-pleasing form, cannot offer. But caring about something more, whether it's truth, creation, mastery, or self-understanding, puts you on a collision course with the expectations of the world. And that collision has consequences. Consequences that ripple through your personal life, your career, your relationships, and even the way society perceives you, which is exactly where we're headed next. Because if the roots of this detachment are buried deep in our psychology and culture, the branches stretch far into the shape of our lives. Step back far enough from the constant swirl of human interaction, and you'll notice something unexpected. At first, the absence feels like silence. Fewer invitations, fewer group chats buzzing in your pocket, fewer last-minute calls asking if you're coming out tonight. You might even feel a flash of guilt, as if you're failing some unspoken civic duty. But then the silence changes. It sharpens. You start to hear things that were always there, buried under the noise, your own thoughts, unfiltered. You begin to notice the subtle pull of your instincts, the tiny inner signals that got drowned out in the crowd. Yet the moment you make this shift, the world shifts around you too. Consequence number 1. You stop being legible to others. Humans are tribal creatures. We read each other through patterns, predictable behaviors that signal where we belong. Attend the same events, laugh at the same jokes, share the same complaints, and you're part of the pattern. Step outside it, and suddenly, you're harder to categorize. When people can't categorize you, they get uneasy. Not necessarily hostile, but wary. You've exited the script, and that makes you unpredictable. In their eyes, unpredictability can feel like a threat. The irony? You haven't become less yourself, you've become more. But because most people only see each other through the shared rituals of social life, your absence registers as a disruption. Consequence number 2. The currency of attention loses its grip on you. Modern social life runs on a strange economy: attention as currency. The more you're seen, tagged, mentioned, and remembered, the more valuable you appear. Step out of that cycle, and you lose the constant inflow of attention, but you also lose the constant hunger for it. This is both liberating and dangerous. Liberating because you no longer measure your worth by how many people are thinking about you. Dangerous because once you're free from that metric, you start to see how deeply it controls others, and you can't unsee it. You begin to notice how much behavior, what people post, what they say in groups, what they wear, even the way they stand, is shaped not by inner conviction but by the desire to be noticed. Once you're outside the system, the performance looks desperate. Consequence number 3. Your relationships polarize. Here's the brutal part. When you stop playing the social game by default, your circle shrinks, but it also strengthens. Casual acquaintances fade. The friends who thrived on your constant availability drift away. But those who remain are the ones who value you for reasons deeper than convenience or shared distractions. Conversations shift from the weather and weekend plans to life goals, fears, and unvarnished truths. But there's a cost. Many won't follow you there. They'll see your withdrawal as rejection even if it isn't. And some will resent the fact that you're comfortable with a solitude they find unbearable. Consequence number 4. You start to see the architecture of influence. When you stop participating in every group discussion, party, or meeting, you begin to observe them from the outside. And from the outside, the mechanics are startlingly clear. You see the power dynamics, the subtle ways people assert dominance or submission. You catch the moments when someone bends their opinion to match the group's mood. You watch how topics rise and fall in importance, not because of their truth, but because of who's speaking and who's listening. This outsider's perspective can be intoxicating, but it also comes with a kind of loneliness, because once you see the architecture of influence, you can't pretend you don't. Consequence number 5. You confront the vacuum. Here's the part most people never anticipate. When you step away from social life, you free up an enormous amount of time and mental bandwidth. But at first, that space doesn't fill itself. You're left with a vacuum, and that vacuum demands you decide what to do with it. For some, this becomes the birthplace of deep work, creative projects, or personal transformation. For others, it becomes a confrontation with the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. Without the constant distraction of social obligations, the unresolved questions in your life rise to the surface. This is where many people run back to the noise, not because they truly love it, but because silence feels like exposure. Consequence number 6. You change the mirror. Social life is a hall of mirrors. We see ourselves reflected in how others react to us. Step away, and you remove many of those mirrors. What's left is a much smaller, more accurate set of reflections. This can be disorienting. Without the constant feedback loop, you have to build your sense of self from within. No more adjusting to every nod, smile, or frown. No more calibrating your personality to match the room. At first, it feels like losing your shape. Then, slowly, you realize you're finding your true outline, one that doesn't warp depending on the angle of the glass. Consequence number 7. You change the social ecosystem itself. Here's the unexpected ripple. When one person steps out of the constant performance, it forces others to confront their own participation. Some will dismiss you, others will criticize you, but a few will quietly feel the pull toward the same freedom. In this way, detachment becomes contagious, not through persuasion, but through example. But there's a paradox here too. The more people who follow you into this quieter way of living, the more it stops being outside the social game and becomes a new kind of game entirely. That's the tension every rebel faces, how to remain free without building yet another cage. And so the unseen consequences are not just about losing parties or gaining solitude. They're about stepping into a fundamentally different relationship with the world, one in which you're no longer passively shaped by the currents of social expectation, but actively choosing your own direction. The question, of course, is what you do with that freedom once you have it, because freedom isn't just absence, it's an open space waiting to be filled, and filling it requires more than withdrawal. It requires a rebellion not just against society's noise, but against the parts of yourself that still crave its approval. That's where we go next. Breaking away from the gravitational pull of constant social engagement is not a gentle drift, it's a rebellion. Not a rebellion with banners and slogans, but the kind that happens in the quiet corridors of the mind. It begins the moment you decide that your time, your focus, and your inner life are more valuable than the performance demanded by the crowd. But rebellion is dangerous, even when it's silent. It threatens the status quo, not just for others, but for the version of yourself that has been trained to seek approval. And make no mistake, that version will fight to survive. Step 1. Redefine connection. The first act of rebellion is refusing the lie that connection equals constant interaction. Society sells you the idea that friendship is measured by frequency, that the more you hang out, the closer you are. But depth is not a matter of hours. It's a matter of truth shared. This means moving away from quantity toward intentionality. One honest conversation, without pretense or performance, is worth more than 20 evenings of polite laughter. Start asking yourself, which interactions leave me more alive and which leave me emptier? Then begin to curate accordingly. Step 2. Embrace strategic solitude. Solitude is not the absence of connection, it's the soil in which clarity grows. But not all solitude is equal. Passive isolation, born from fear or resentment, corrodes the spirit. Strategic solitude, chosen with purpose, strengthens it. Schedule time where your only task is to be alone with your thoughts, away from screens and stimuli. At first the quiet will itch. Your mind will scramble for noise, let it. On the other side of that discomfort lies the capacity to think independently, to hear the faint signals of your own mind without interference. Nietzsche walked miles each day in solitude. Virginia Woolf insisted on a room of one's own. They weren't withdrawing from life. They were preparing to meet it on their own terms. Step 3. Dismantle the validation loop. The most addictive drug in modern society isn't caffeine, sugar, or nicotine. It's recognition, and like any drug, it distorts behavior. You post, not because you need to express something, but because you want a reaction. You attend not because you want to be there, but because you want to be seen. Breaking the loop means 2 things. 1. Becoming conscious of when you're doing something for approval rather than for its own sake. 2. Deliberately choosing not to feed that need, even when it costs you attention. At first, the absence of recognition feels like loss. Then, it becomes relief. Eventually, it becomes power. Step 4. Rebuild your identity from the inside out. The social self is built from outside in. You see how others react to you, and you shape yourself accordingly. Breaking free means reversing the process, building from the core outward. Ask, if no one could see me, if no one could hear about my choices, what would I still do? What would I still value? Who would I still be? When you start living according to those answers, you create a self that is less dependent on the mirror of other people's eyes. Step 5. Create a parallel world. Here's the trap most rebels fall into. They withdraw from the social machine, but they don't replace it with anything equally compelling. Nature abhors a vacuum, and a life without purpose will always get pulled back into the crowd. Your rebellion must be anchored in a parallel world, a space of creation, mastery, or service that absorbs your energy as fully as the social game once did. This could be writing, building, inventing, training, exploring, anything that demands your mind's highest attention. When your parallel world becomes richer than the social one, the temptation to go back to the performance fades on its own. Step 6. Learn to be misunderstood. Freedom comes with a price tag: misinterpretation. People will call you antisocial, arrogant, depressed, or broken, not because you are, but because your choices unsettle their own. The rebellion requires that you stop correcting these misunderstandings. Let people think what they need to think. You're not responsible for making your life legible to everyone. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." He didn't mean that human beings are inherently bad. He meant that living under the constant gaze of others warps our behavior. Your task is to live as if that gaze has no power over you. Step 7. Protect your mental sovereignty. Even in withdrawal, the world will try to pull you back in. Invitations will arrive. Notifications will ping. Your absence will be noticed and tested. Mental sovereignty means having a filter for what enters your attention. Not every request deserves a response. Not every conversation is worth joining. Not every conflict needs your participation. The less you allow in, the more your mind belongs to you. And the more your mind belongs to you, the more valuable your presence becomes when you do choose to give it. This rebellion is not about becoming a hermit. It's about reclaiming your life from the unconscious patterns that social conditioning has wired into you. When you succeed, something strange happens. The crowd stops feeling like the center of the world. You no longer orbit it, seeking its light and warmth. Instead, you become your own center. And from that center, you begin to see the world differently, not as a stage you must constantly perform on, but as a landscape you can move through on your own terms. But there's one more step. Because rebellion is not the final destination. Beyond rebellion lies something deeper, A truth so profound that once you see it, the entire question of social life becomes almost irrelevant. It's not about how much or how little time you spend with people. It's about what reality you choose to inhabit when you do or don't, and that's where we go now. Imagine, for a moment, that you've fully stepped away from the constant hum of social obligation. No endless stream of invitations to weigh, no background anxiety about what you might be missing, no compulsion to share every thought or accomplishment for public approval. You're not hiding, you're simply living and doing so without the silent audience you once assumed was always watching. At first, it feels like relief, then it feels like power, but eventually, it becomes something else entirely. There comes a moment in this journey when you realize the debate over social life no longer applies to you, not because you've decided one way or another, but because the entire framework has dissolved. It's like asking a bird whether it prefers flying north or south. It's no longer about direction, it's about the air itself. You begin to see that the whole tension between engagement and withdrawal, between being seen and being invisible, was always rooted in a deeper illusion, the belief that your identity depends on its reflection in other minds. This is the moment when the rebellion becomes transcendence. From childhood, you were taught to construct yourself through feedback. A smile meant approval. A frown meant adjustment. Praise meant keep going. Silence meant you weren't enough. This system built a self that existed, almost entirely, in the eyes of others. When you step away from the social stage, that self begins to crumble, and in its place, another emerges, a self that isn't constantly negotiating its existence through the approval of the tribe. This is the ultimate truth. You are not the reflection. You are the source. Once you live from that center, social life becomes optional, not in the sense of being unnecessary, but in the sense of being free from obligation. You can engage without dependence, withdraw without loss. You're no longer asking, do I have enough friends? Am I connected enough? Instead, you're asking, does this moment align with who I am? The collapse of the FOMO illusion. Fear of missing out, the psychological tether that keeps people overcommitted, loses all its power here. You see it for what it is, a fear not of missing events, but of missing affirmation. When you no longer need constant affirmation to feel real, you can skip the party without a second thought. You can miss the conversation without craving the recap. Life becomes less about keeping up and more about sinking in, fully, deeply into the present moment you've chosen. And here's the paradox. The less you chase inclusion, the more magnetic you become. People sense the absence of need, and it draws them, not because you're trying to attract them, but because self-possession is rare in a world addicted to validation. Time becomes sacred. The ultimate reward of transcending the social tug-of-war is not isolation, it's sovereignty over your time. When you no longer spend hours maintaining connections you don't value, you gain hours for the things that matter: building, learning, creating, exploring. Time stops being a schedule dictated by invitations and expectations and becomes a resource you spend with intention. And here's something few will tell you. The projects, insights, and transformations born in this kind of focused time often have far more impact on the world than years of dutiful sociability. Freedom from the performance. There's a lightness that comes when you realize you don't have to maintain a public version of yourself at all times. No more calibrating your words to avoid offense. No more pretending to be more agreeable, more interested, or more enthusiastic than you feel. When you do choose to speak or engage, it comes from authenticity, not obligation. This doesn't mean you become rude or careless. It means your presence is real, and people can feel it. In a world full of curated personalities, that realness is rare enough to be revolutionary. The return without the chains. Perhaps the most surprising part of this journey is that eventually you may return to social life, not because you have to, but because you want to. The difference is you return without the chains. You can join a conversation without needing it to confirm your worth. You can spend time with others without losing time with yourself. You've gone beyond the binary of social versus antisocial. You live in a third space, one where interaction is a choice, not a compulsion, And solitude is a resource, not a punishment. Here's the truth that makes everything else fall away. The smartest people aren't rejecting social life, they're rejecting dependency on it. They've discovered that the ultimate form of connection isn't with a crowd, but with their own unfiltered existence. Once you're anchored in that, you can move between solitude and society like a traveler crossing landscapes, enjoying each for what it offers, leaving when it no longer serves, returning when it calls. You're not fleeing the world, and you're not chasing it. You're simply free. And maybe that's the real measure of intelligence. Not how many people know your name, but how little your happiness depends on whether they do. You could vanish from the social radar tomorrow and still wake up whole. You could spend a month in deep conversation or a month in complete silence and feel equally alive. Because once you've seen through the illusion, there is no social life to care about or reject. There's only life. And the smartest people have decided they will live it entirely on their own terms.